and then do mass deportations that are violent.
Adam, I think, look, I'm not your enemy, but I do think you're debating a little bit here. Given the option between mass deportation and mass amnesty, Americans have never historically chosen mass deportation over mass amnesty. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. But what's your...
But you would have known that if you watched me, or even if you watched my Ro Khanna video, because I brought it up to Democrats over and over again. This is what I'm saying. I'm going to talk to Adam Mockler right now, okay? And we're going to talk about where we go, what is to be done, where we go from here, and a lot more. And then we'll get back to the Jeffrey Epstein files in a little bit. All right, Adam, welcome to the broadcast. I think we're going to have a wonderful and productive conversation, even though I know that there's a lot of people on Twitter that hail you as their debate champion, and they're like, it's finally time. It's finally time to destroy Hasan in the marketplace of ideas. I don't know if that'll happen, but wait, is there audio echo, chat? Is that what's going on? Oh yeah, you're hearing me a little bit, I think, from your end.
Let me fix that.
Yeah, and I'll also up your volume as well.
Yeah, it's a few things. Let me make sure you can hear me correctly.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah,
I cranked
I
you
want
up.
this to be a productive conversation. I want to make sure we can make some progress, because I think we're all united in one goal of beating fascism at the end of the day. And I'm not here to shame anybody for voting one way or not voting one way. I honestly don't even think you guys all have to line up behind Gavin Newsom 2 years before the primary. We're 2 years out ahead of the primary. We have an exciting ideological battle coming up. So I'm not asking you to like jump up and down for Gavin Newsom. However, I do want to talk about your response to Jennifer Welch on that podcast, because I do have some thoughts, and I think I can bring a pretty good faith version of what a lot of people on Twitter are trying to say, but kind of getting muddled in. But yeah, we're going to agree on a lot regarding criticism of the Democratic Party, probably where the Democratic Party needs to go. We'll agree a lot. I'm very disillusioned with the Democratic Party as well. But I think there's some good faith criticisms of the way that you approach that question, or the way that you talk about this. But
Yeah. Yeah, if you want to know what my positions are, and I think you're already pretty familiar with my positions. I know that like you've probably heard me speak on these issues for years and years at this point. But my primary goal, especially in the interim, especially in the short term, is the defeat of fascism. I believe that the Republican Party is an illiberal party, a post-liberal party, whatever you want to call it. And I think unlike the historic inception of fascism as a revolutionary movement at a time when liberalism was failing only 100 years ago, this time we have two liberal parties in America. Like as a political theory, we have two liberal parties, right? Like we say conservative, whatever, but like technically the Republicans are also a liberal party.
Yep.
And now the Republican...
Well, not MAGA.
Yeah, the Republican Party is historically a liberal party, but is now turning away from liberalism and becoming an illiberal party, a post-liberal party, and turning into a fascist party. I warned about this the first Trump election as well. I warned about the proto-fascist nature of Donald Trump. I thought that it was important to make that distinction. I didn't say that Trump, like season 1 of Donald Trump was fully fascist, but season 2 of Donald Trump is. And I think it's important to make that distinction as well, because like you can see the difference, right? Like there was a lot of naked corruption, a lot of things that were going on in the first Trump administration, but the second Trump administration has been so brazen, so obvious, and it's not like they've hidden that reality at all, especially when they were running to become the president, when they were running through the in the 2024 election season. So my primary goal is to defeat that completely.
Yeah.
And obviously, I also want to build socialism. I want to build a working class movement. And I don't think these two goals are at odds with one another. I think both historically and also in general, I believe that the evolution away from the liberal system that we exist under, that is now failing for the second time around, and making way for fascism, the only solution out of that is to build a working class based organized socialist movement. But yeah, those are my two main points. If you
Yeah, I
can.
mean, I guess I want to ask you, do you think it would be easier, do you think it would be meaningfully easier to build this working class socialist based movement in a liberal society or an illiberal society?
Oh, historically speaking, most likely an illiberal society. At least historically speaking, socialist and communist movements have unfortunately only been successful when material conditions have worsened. I don't want that to happen though, because
Hmm.
I don't want to live through that, and I don't think that that is like an appropriate thing to move towards. I don't think that that's good for people. I think it's very violent and very deadly. I don't want the material conditions to deteriorate. But if you're asking me, like honestly, from a historical perspective, no, it
No, I'm
absolutely is.
basically asking. I'm basically just asking if we get to a 2028 and like I guess we can get into the hypothetical of Newsom versus Vance, but it's not even about that. They're kind of just stand-ins. I don't even want to concede who our nominee is going to be 2 years ahead, but I think there would be a meaningful difference in building a pro-labor movement under a JD Vance presidency, which would be much harder, versus a Gavin Newsom presidency. I mean, JD Vance's entire career has been trying to step on top of workers.
I agree.
He endorsed Project 2025, which literally wants to bring child labor laws back to 1938. He's fundamentally illiberal and doesn't want to let you organize. I mean, like a lack of organization is part of not living in a liberal society, right? They will squash that. They will kill
Yeah.
communists. They will kill socialists. That's what they did in other fascist societies. They killed socialists and communists. Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom, however insufficient you may think he is, and this is not an endorsement of Gavin Newsom, I'm just trying to illustrate my points of, the different realities we could enter. However insufficient you think Gavin Newsom is, he would allow for a really strong labor movement. He would allow for you guys to at least, organize, and he would probably communicate with you guys.
First of all, I
agree
don't
with
even
him?
think you guys. I think you're a part of this as well. I don't. You're
Yeah.
not against like organizing a labor movement, right? But
No, I'm not against
also,
that.
yeah. Also, can you crank up your volume a little bit on your end? Because I maxed it out, but people still are having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, my bad. A lot of causing a
No,
lot of
it's all
issues.
good. Um, as far as like what's better rooms for organizing, it's not even a necessary part of this discussion because I know
Well, it
that
is.
no, the reason why I'm saying it's not a necessary part of this discussion is because given the option between Gavin Newsom and JD Vance, I'm not saying that Gavin Newsom is going to be a situation than JD Vance. I understand and agree with, in theory, the harm reduction narratives. My argument is always around doing away with harm reduction narratives because the harm reduction narrative has led to two spectacular failures thus far, both in 2016 and also in 2020. And as far as like playing hardball with Democrats who don't want to listen, who still want to hold on and maintain this like harm reduction narrative, who still say that they want to appeal to this like mythical moderate voter, who's outside of the who isn't a normal Democratic Party voter, like these guys that they want to turn to the Democratic Party. I'm willing to play hardball with them and say like, look, I'll hold my vote back. But the reality of the matter is, if you're asking me sincerely, like, do you think that Gavin Newsom is going to be better than JD Vance? Of course. I mean, this is not something just like Kamala Harris is objectively going to be better than Donald Trump. The miscommunication, the miscommunication around this comes in large part due to me openly saying like it's out of my hands at that point, because that was the second part that I mentioned. It's openly out of my hands at that point, and there's no way for me to overcome the way that the party is communicating what they want to do, and the fact that a lot of people hear that and immediately go, "Oh, this guy, he wants the Republicans to win." I don't.
Yeah, I don't think you want the Republicans to win. I don't think that at all. And here's where we agree on, actually. So I keep hearing you say that you don't want Democrats to run on the harm reduction narrative in 2028. And I totally effing agree. If we're running on a harm reduction narrative in 2028, we have failed somewhere massively. We want to build an exciting, forward-looking message that can turn out not only our base, but Americans who have been struggling. We need to have something that is not just us unified to our opposition of Donald Trump. For the past decade, we have been defined by our opposition to Trump, and we need something more exciting. So I agree. We should not run on a harm reduction narrative in 2028. But like what you just said, how you just worded your statement, was not how you worded it when Jennifer Welch asked you that question.
No,
You
I
said
thought
at
I would
that
vote.
point
I would vote third party because it's out of my hands at that point.
no, you said at that point it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, at
You
that
said
point,
at
it
that
does.
point
Sorry,
doesn't-
yeah. That what I meant is it's out of my hands, which is the argument that I've made with Kamala Harris after like urging the campaign to listen to the warning signs that the people were giving them about their reluctance to address Gaza in a meaningful way, like signaling that they would truly be like an anti-war a party, even though Donald Trump is like a fucking warmonger, trying to get them to communicate that there are meaningful differences between their design overall, not leaning in and not conceding on the white nativist anti-immigrant narratives, knowing full well how devastating Trump's mass deportations were going to look like. I poured hours and hours and hours of commentary into this, thousands of hours of commentary into this, and it's always reduced back to whatever like reasonable soundbite that people can cling on to say, oh, we got him. He's a third party guy.
What do you mean it's out of? Well, you said you would vote third party, but what do you mean it's out of your hands?
Oh, perfect.
Like you mean like we would lose at that point?
I don't know if we would necessarily. I don't know if we would lose because JD Vance is uniquely uncharismatic.
Yeah,
but
we saw that today.
I mean, we see that every day, right? I mean, he's fucking disaster. I still think that Gavin Newsom is particularly weak against JD Vance, unfortunately. Sure. So I don't know. I feel like it would still be a toss-up at that point, partially because while JD Vance is not capable of holding the Trump coalition together, I don't even worry about JD Vance as much necessarily. I don't really worry about Marco Rubio. I worry about Tucker Carlson. I think Tucker Carlson has he's the real torch carrier of the MAGA movement. I don't even know if Donald Trump recognizes that yet or admits that personally, but I think it's there. And
he fits the mold of an outsider, populist, anti-establishment
television
person
guy who understands how to communicate. He is charismatic as well. So
that is really scary.
So he is the one I'm actually terrified of, more so than Marco Rubio, who is like a straight line neocon. He's not going to be able to do the populist shit. And JD Vance is basically like evil Pete Buttigieg, like role reversal Pete Buttigieg, where like he also has that like McKinsey consultant vibe to him. I like to say when, JD Vance comes into your neighborhood, you know that like the coal mine is shutting down. Like he has the attitude of a guy who's going to be like, we see you, we hear you, but we have to eliminate some redundancies. And I think most working class individuals, regardless of the MAGA cult, kind of see that he is insincere. So he doesn't have that populist element. And he tries to make up for it by being like this gross little groiper, even though he has an Indian wife and Indian children. And therefore, even the super racists don't like him for that reason. So these are just like the two default positions that the Trump administration is like, looking at right now. But I do think it's like possibly going to be Tucker Carlson. Now, going back to Gavin Newsom versus JD Vance, Gavin Newsom unfortunately has a lot of the California stink associated with him. I love California. I live here. And there's a lot of exaggerations about how devastating California is, like how terrible the conditions are here. People are all doing crime and doing drugs and everyone's homeless on the street. But there is a real problem from the policy side of things with California. Gavin Newsom is, and he's demonstrated this already, beholden to corporate interests. And will pretty aggressively go out to bat for corporate interests in general.
Sometimes he's pushed back on a lot of special interest groups in California, though. They're pretty progressive state overall.
But the number one problem facing all Americans, I think you and I will agree on, other than healthcare, is housing, right? Mm-hmm. And California has a huge issue with housing, and we have voted for a million different ballot initiatives at this point to pay for shelter, pay for additional tax revenue so that we can go and build new homes and things of that nature. And none of it ever gets done. There's a lot of institutional rot here as well. Not to get all abundist on this conversation, but like there is a little bit of truth to what the abundist guys say. And so that homelessness narrative will stick for the uneducated. But even for the educated, like the educated voters, they will also recognize, like people like myself, recognize the setbacks that Gavin Newsom has presented to combat the housing market issue in the state of California.
Yeah, so I guess a few things that I want to respond to. I agree with you about Newsom's electability problems, and I think a lot of people would agree. I mean, I have a massive liberal audience, and even they're not fully behind any candidate right now,
Yeah.
especially not fully behind Newsom 2 years ahead of the election. I think that now is our time to use the leverage we have, and I think that's what you're trying to do during the Jennifer Welch podcast. And
Yeah.
like, I want to keep returning to that conversation that you had, because you said in the conversation at that point it doesn't even matter, but you at this point mean it was out of your hands, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you clarify, what do you mean it was out of your hands?
So,
Just yeah.
and I also talked about like my refusal to endorse Kamala Harris as well, and we can get into that too. What I mean by that is exactly what I said in the 2024 election, where it was like, you can't, as a singular individual, or even with like the entire might of the media behind you, outflank the actual campaign. So if Gavin Newsom is running as the Gavin Newsom that we know so far, you know, he'll say certain things like, oh, I refuse to take money from AIPAC. Great. But then when push comes to shove, like he will still be inconsistent on the issue of Israel. He won't like fully subscribe to you know, punishing Israeli leadership, or fully subscribe to like refusing any sort of arms sales to Israel. And outside of Israel, of course, you know, beholden to corporate interests when it comes to like the real estate lobby, anti-Medicare for all. If he runs as that, okay, there's no amount of advocacy that I can engage in that will make him look better. I can consistently talk about how much worse the Republican
That's
side
not
is
what you
going
were
to
asked.
be.
You were asked if you would vote for him. And I'm not even saying you should have said yes in that moment, but you were asked, would you vote for him? And you said at that point, it doesn't even matter. Here's what I'm getting at here.
Yeah.
I think there was a very solid answer you could have given that didn't outrage the liberals online as much. And I know that a lot of people flung a lot of shit at you on Twitter. That's always what happens. But
Yeah.
I think there was an answer where you could have been like, listen, I refuse to pre-commit to any candidate 2 years ahead of a primary. They have to earn my votes, and that's what I want to see. And I totally get you're on stream like 8 hours a day. You're not always going to say everything perfectly. But here's where a lot of liberals online are mad, and here's where we're all kind of talking past each other. I see a lot of people online saying all liberals want us to line up behind Gavin Newsom 2 years before a primary. And that's not even the argument that any of us are making. I think where a lot of liberals have problems with the way you speak about the Democratic Party is that you try to minimize the gap between the Democratic and Republican Party. So I can totally grant that you meant to say like, well, you were asked, you were asked, would you vote for JD Vance or Gavin Newsom? You said, I'd vote third party. At that point, it doesn't even matter. It feels like you're drawing a false equivalency. And then a few days later, you basically said, Gavin Newsom will only be marginally better than whatever Republican candidate there is. Then you said, Democrats have literally written you out of existence regarding trans people.
Wait,
Then
did you see the rest of that quote?
I watched the video, but yeah, I watched what's the rest of the quote?
Did you hear me say that marginal differences between each candidacy, like marginal differences between two parties, leads to drastically different outcomes for marginalized populations? Having said that, however, from the eye of like a voter, they don't make that distinction at all, especially if they are coming at it from a privileged position. If it doesn't like attack, if it doesn't harm them at all. And not only
there's not
that,
a marginal. So you're you're kind of conflating two things. When you say there's a marginal difference between the two parties, I think that signals to people that either way they vote, it doesn't really matter that much. That's how people take that. When you say trans people you said like Democrats would shoot trans people in the back of the head, that signals that Democrats aren't really that different than Republicans, when that's not true. There's not a marginal difference between Democrats and Republicans. There's a very meaningful difference. If it was like Obama versus McCain and you said there's a marginal difference,
I said
fine.
Democrats would, it's exaggeration. Democrats would kill trans people if it meant securing additional electoral votes. And that's not an argument that like Democrats are going to run on a policy of killing trans people. It's a hyperbolic statement about Democrats cutting out trans people, which, as you saw probably in this last week, in the aftermath of the fucking neo-Nazi MAGA dad, or not MAGA dad, the trans shooter that was a fucking huge neo-Nazi, who's apparently his son was also a neo-Nazi, who's in prison as well, which is, you know, not very shocking. There were a lot of people floating around bad polls about, not bad necessarily from a, like the polls are fine, but they were polls that made it seem as though the trans issue is something that we as Democrats should not actually advocate for. It was Laksha Jain. And I always go back to obviously the first week after the Kamala Harris election defeat, where a bunch of prominent Democrats who got yelled at, to be fair, by other Democrats in the caucus, but a bunch of prominent Democrats went on television and immediately were like, we lost because of the trans stuff. they put a lot of overemphasis in the Kamala Harris is going to give bottom surgeries to Guatemalan transgender prisoners in immigrant detention facilities. My argument always is, if the Democrats actually put forth policies that people have to attack, like the Republicans have to attack, then the trans issue just becomes unserious and a relic of the culture war that people don't pay attention to. And in the absence of definable policies that you can associate with the Democrats, they become very defined by what their enemy, the Republicans, define them as.
Yeah, so
that's also,
I don't actually
Yeah.
I don't
Go ahead.
disagree with your analysis at the end there. I do think that if we had a more affirmative, unifying message, then people wouldn't care. Like Medicare for all would be really exciting for so many people. I heard you say this, and I actually agree there. But just because some Democrats went on TV after Kamala lost, and just because some Democrats that are floating polls around on Twitter that are showing people don't like trans, that doesn't mean Democrats don't care about trans people or have written them out of existence. Like the difference between Democrats and Republicans on trans people is not marginal. It is not slight. It is very, very meaningful. If you grew up in the state of Indiana, where I grew up, and you tell a counselor that you are having thoughts about, like gender dysphoria or you want to change your name, they have to go tell your parents. But if you go across the state borders in the state of Illinois, someone who you probably think is like a moderate billionaire, J.B. Pritzker, he's turned it into a sanctuary state where you can get your.
I like JB's policies. Yeah, I'm very aware of this distinction.
Okay, but wait a minute. So J.B. Pritzker, Andy Bashir, even Governor Newsom turned California into a sanctuary state. It is a very progressive state. So can you see how people are bothered when you then go on the stream, and I'm quoting you verbatim, you said, Democrats have written you out of existence. Democrats don't give a fuck about you. And then you said later on, the marginalized identities have been left behind by the Democratic Party. You're kind of drawing a false equivalency. And then that brings me back to the Jennifer Welch clip. I'm trying to give you the strongest liberal argument here as to why people are mad. It's not because
and by the way, I've heard this argument. I used to make this argument myself.
Yeah, but you said at that point it doesn't even matter, and that kind of feeds into the broader apathy that you seem to be pushing towards. So there is a meaningful difference between Democrats and Republicans on trans issues, right? If you grew up in a Democrat or a Republican state, there's a meaningful difference between your quality of life. Can you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so a meaningful difference. There's a big difference. Okay, so
no, there is a meaningful difference between living in a democratic state, hopefully one that isn't captured by Republican state legislatures that will then, even under Democratic leadership within the White House, take advantage of the state legislature apparatus to still undermine trans existence and then take that all the way up the courts of the Supreme Court. There's a meaningful distinction between having a liberal Supreme Court majority versus a Republican Supreme Court majority, a super majority even. These are all things that I fully understand and fully agree to and don't want to happen. When I talk about the Democratic Party's lack of interest in like actively fighting back and counter messaging against the Republican misinformation around trans people, what I'm talking about is Democrats running from a place of fear. What I want the Democrats to do is to, one, not compromise at all when it comes to putting forth a counter messaging operation to go back and fight back against the Republican Party when it comes to trans issues. But also, this isn't even just about trans people either. This goes back to even undocumented migrants and migrants in general, like Haitians eating cats and dogs, all the endless amounts of attacks, and the notion that like undocumented migrants constitute a national security threat, the way that the Republicans present it. It's pure hysteria. Something that I've told Democrats over and over again, urged Democrats over and over again, even when Joe Biden was president early on, down to the DNC, where I talked to them directly and told them to address over and over again with the hopes that they would, at the very least, push back against this so we wouldn't have seemingly a more, like a bigger mandate, a bigger popular mandate for Donald Trump on issues such as that. I think every moment that the Democrats waste, not on the offensive, on affirmative policies and affirmative policy vision that is easily definable, is a moment where the conversation revolves around culture war issues, specifically attacking trans people, and it ends up harming trans people that way. There is a big difference between a blue state and a red one in terms of trans existence. To deny that would be silly. I don't deny that at all.
Good. What about between like a Newsom, if Newsom got everything he wanted in America and JD Vance got everything he wanted in America, do you think there would be a meaningful difference for trans people?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I mean,
So
we're
this.
like Donald Trump's first action when he came into office. Like this might come as a surprise to people, maybe in your audience or people that have seen these clips, and assume that assume that I don't think that there's any difference between a Democratic leadership or a Republican one. I will never work with Republicans. Well, I guess maybe Thomas Massey on like a very random issue. You know what I mean? A random issue that's like the Epstein files, something like that. But I don't agree with Republicans ideologically, and my criticisms of the Democratic Party revolve around their closeness to Republicans or their endless interest in conceding to Republicans on certain issues, because that concession doesn't actually end up causing them to win elections. The only thing it actually ends up doing is those concessions actually normalize some of the Republican agenda items in the eyes of the base of the Democratic Party. And only until people realize how devastating the outcome of those policies are, do they turn around and go, oh, I have buyer's remorse now. Fell for it again award. I didn't realize that the party that said they were going to do mass deportations is actually doing mass deportations. Or I didn't realize that those mass deportations were going to look so fucking violent and so disgusting that my neighbors were going to be in fear.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with a lot of that. And I don't want you to think I was just watching clips of you. I watched your entire stream.
I know.
Where it just felt like you were saying two different things at once. You take these really strong declarative statements or those positions about the Democratic Party, and like you quite literally said Democrats, or you said the marginalized identities have been left behind by the Democratic Party. And then you go on to explain in a little bit more nuance that yes, growing up in a trans state or a red state would be better than growing up in a blue state would be better than a red state as a trans person. So you do clarify that in the video that I watched. But can you then see how Democrats, or at least liberals on Twitter, who are just like seeing you repeatedly say this, Gavin Newsom will be marginally better than whatever the Democratic candidate is, but you then just said to me that you think he will be meaningfully better if he got into
marginal
the office.
Differences in terms of policy in the way that they communicate it. Like Gavin Newsom, I don't know what he's going to run on in terms of, defending trans people, right? Like I don't know how big of a part of his advocacy this will be. I can only look to what he's trying to do, what he's trying to present himself as right now, right? Because we can look at his experience as a governor in California, but then if there is a significant difference that he's communicating now because he has ambitions in higher office, it's only causing to assume that he is going to probably pivot, like many other Democrat, to this mythical, this center for the mythical moderate voter. Do you think that that's an unfair assessment? Let's just start there, first of all.
That he shouldn't pivot to the center?
No. That judging by the position between what kind of trans protections that he has signed into law when he was the governor, when he is the governor of California, versus how he's communicating now about certain aspects of trans identity and trans issues is probably a pretty reliable way to comprehend whether or not he is going to pivot to the center on trans issues a little bit.
No, I don't think
you don't think so?
The way he talked. No, I don't think you can conflate the way he spoke to Charlie Kirk on the podcast with the way that he's actually ruled California. There is a very, very meaningful difference between the way that he's the way that he's ruled California versus the way that Republicans would. And here's the problem.
I don't even I don't disagree with that. The reason why I'm asking that is
but here's the problem. There's a category error happening here where you keep saying that there's a marginal difference between the parties. And I get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying. You think there is a marginal policy difference between the parties because you think Democrats should be farther to the left and stand up for this stuff. But when you say that, a lot of liberals think that you're arguing that there's a marginal difference in outcomes. And you are conceding right here, there's not a marginal difference in outcomes.
No, there's not a marginal difference in outcomes.
Okay, so I think that needs to be clarified more because that does kind of draw some apathy between voters. But going back to Gavin Newsom, no, he has quite literally changed the way California looks at trans people. Just because he gave an insufficient answer on Gavin Newsom's podcast doesn't lead me to believe that he's going to entirely throw trans people under the bus. Let me just go through this. He signed
hold on, not entirely, but do you feel? And I'm not trying to debate you on this. I'm just asking you, sincerely. Do you think that it is indicative that there is at least in the way that he's communicating, a pivot to a more moderate position on trans issues because he calculates this as more electorally viable?
No. Was he asked about trans issues or trans sports in particular?
The pieces that I've seen is mostly talking about transports and saying that transports
Yeah,
is
so it's
a bridge too far or something like that.
yeah, and like that can totally be insufficient for your worldview, and you can say that that is not sufficiently progressive enough. But I think that to say that Gavin Newsom, because he said that to Charlie Kirk, that nullifies the way that he's actually ran in California. You're using that one conversation to wait.
It doesn't.
Okay,
I don't think it nullifies the way in California. I'm making an assessment off
Newsom has
of.
signed a law. Sorry.
I'm making an assessment off of. I know Gavin Newsom, just like Andy Bashar, who I have given tremendous props to, more so than Gavin Newsom because he's doing it in fucking a Trump 35 state, right? Trump plus 35 state.
Yeah, he's holding the line
with a hostile state legislature too. So it's like it's infinitely more difficult. He actually shows the rest of the Democratic Party. I use him as an example to show the rest of the Democratic Party that you don't have to be compromising. And the way he's talked about trans people is actually wonderful. Where he says these are, Christian. These are my neighbor. God teaches me to love my neighbor, not to fight my neighbor. I remember when he stood up against that state legislature member where he was like, you have to apologize to these constituents. These are your constituents as well. Wait, hold on one second. Can you take it off of emote only mode? What's going on? Why do people keep saying robot? Why do people keep spamming robots? Is there an issue?
Is my mic better now too? Sorry.
No, I've been hearing you clearly this entire time, but I don't know what the fuck's going on. I took it off emote mode. Is it effing? Oh, it's just a small lag and people lose their fucking minds over it? Is that what it is?
Liberals and leftists are agreeing, so the deep state's taking us down. They're like, we can't have agreement on a stream between the two factions.
It's stuttering on Hasan only. Huh. You've been lagging for like the last 5 minutes? No. Audio is an audio disaster, but it was only 8 seconds or so. It's fine now. Okay, sorry. They were just like spamming the robot emoji over and over again, so I thought there was like something devastating happening. Okay. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, I was saying Andy Bashar is glazing Andy Bashar for uncompromising
he's
on his
on
values.
Business, bro.
Yes. That's especially within the confines of like what he is capable of doing. I mean, that's very impressive, and I think it should be a lesson that other Democrats should follow as well, and some do, and some are cowards. But as far as the Gavin Newsom thing, I am aware. I think it's like, what, 49 LGBTQ plus bills that Gavin Newsom as governor has signed into law. I mean, as a mayor of San Francisco, his first nationally prominent act was literally to defend gay marriage in San Francisco. Like, I'm very familiar with Gavin Newsom's background. He's my governor, right? I know a lot about Gavin Newsom's background. What I am fearful of and what I worry about is the same exact pivot that we have seen from many Democrats that signal that they're invested in selling out trans people, or at least certain aspects of trans identity, whether it be sports, a conversation that starts off with the most appropriate angle to tackle that Republicans spend hundreds of millions of dollars against and create controversy around, this being, trans sports, to very quickly moving the conversation over to gender confirmation surgery, and a litany of different anti-trans bills that basically lead to making it illegal to be trans in public. The conversation.
I don't think Newsom would go that far.
No. I don't think Newsom is going to go that far either.
Yeah.
But my point is, any concession that you're making about trans existence in public, instead of just simply moving the conversation back to a territory that is appropriate, a territory that is pertinent for every single person in America, something that is more consequential for the average person, groceries, ability, healthcare, things of that nature, is lost ground for no reason that then justifies the additional anti-trans bill come after that. Well, so you're opening the door to that conversation rather than stopping it. It's fucking true. My argument.
No, dude, I totally agree that Democrats should stand on business when it comes to trans. Am I lagging at all? Is it good?
No, I'm the one who's lagging apparently a little bit. It's
so
crazy because it's not even
here's
fighting anymore.
what I think is happening. You can't like. Yeah, now it's lagging for me too. I can barely hear you. But here's where I think the difference is. You know, like the big dog, small dog meme, where you say something intense and then you kind of say something not as intense.
You mean
I
Mott
feel
and
like
Bailey?
when you're on the podcast, when you're on your show, a lot of these statements are so Yeah, the Mott and Bailey, of course. I feel like you're pulling a little bit of a Mott and Bailey right now for non-Gen Z meme lingo. Like you're on your show, and this isn't even meant to be like a confrontation or anything, just so you know. But like I think this is genuinely where a lot
They're
of
saying
liberals
it's bad.
have friction.
Let's hold off for a second.
I think
Let's hold off for a second. Just wait it out. Sorry, it's gonna come back in a second.
No.
The lag comes and goes. To be honest, it's gone for me now. Is it good now? No, chat. Adam is not the one who brought up Mott and Bailey. I did. Okay, they're saying you're engaging in debate pervertry. I'm the one who did it. Okay, I'm the one who said Mott and Bailey. All right, go on.
Yeah, I don't want you to think this is some like confrontation where I'm trying to like pin you down or anything. But when you go on your show and your stream and these clips go viral in liberal circles, I think the friction comes from you saying stuff. And it's just important that I quote you verbatim. Like, Democrats have literally written you out of existence regarding trans people. Marginalized identities have been left behind by the Democratic Party. Democrats don't give a fuck about you. They would shoot you if it meant they could secure votes. And then I come on here and you're like, wait a minute. I do acknowledge that Newsom would be meaningfully better on trans issues. I do acknowledge that J.B. Pritzker is meaningfully better. Blue states are meaningfully better. And then your strongest argument as to why Democrats are throwing them under the bus are some polls that you see on Twitter, not from Democratic Party leaders, but from like Lakshaya Jain or whatever. Some people after the 2024 election going on TV and saying something to the effect of, oh, we lost because of trans people. That's obviously bullshit. Get those people out of here. And then Gavin Newsom on Charlie Kirk's podcast. That's your evidence that the Democratic Party is throwing marginalized people or leaving marginalized people behind. I don't see it. And I do agree we should
It's not just trans people either, by the way. This argument extends not just to trans people in general. It extends to different backgrounds as well, including but not limited to immigrants.
These are two different arguments you're making, though.
No, because like the reason why is because of what you've also seen that comes usually fairly closely after the end of that clip, which is the assessment that corresponds to my broader outlook, my viewpoint, which is that there is no reason to make these sorts of concessions whatsoever. It's like these are people who are infinitely more influential within the Democratic Party's ecosystem than someone like myself. Okay, every single time I talk, it starts fucking going down. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Sorry. What the fuck, dude? I hate the fucking ISPs. It's insane. Okay, I think it's back. They're saying we're good. Okay. Would you agree that I have a more nuanced approach to this issue than the way that clips present my perspective? Because even when we had the conversation, even when we had the conversation with Jennifer Welsh, like Jennifer Welsh and I had that conversation, there was an additional, 2 minutes of back and forth that we had where I was talking about how I
watched it, yeah.
Yeah, harm reduction narratives are exactly what a lot of establishment Democrats lean on in an effort to moderate their positions for the mythical moderate voter. And this is like their primary vehicle for driving voters to go out and vote. And it's been an abject failure every single time. It's it leads to bad policies in general, and it's bad politics in general as well. Because you and I both agree that we want a fighting Democratic Party, one that fights uncompromisingly for not just individual marginalized identities, but fights for the entirety of the working class in a holistic way. And
absolutely,
when they don't present themselves as such, and they've been pretty bad at it. I mean, I think I saw you even criticize Hakeem Jeffries as well, or Chuck Schumer at least, like recently, saying like they must resign.
Yeah, our approval rating sucks.
There's a reason for that, and there's a reason for why there is I think only a 77% approval rating for Democrats within the party, right? Like we have a historically high disapproval rating right now for the Democratic Party. I think is like 21%, which is unprecedented for when a Republican is in office, a Republican that is as devastating as the Trump administration has been. That is a fucking massive alarm bell. And I feel like instead of recognizing that, we're still following along the third way neoliberalism of the past, all the way from Bill Clinton to even to a certain degree Barack Obama as well, where we just keep looking for a more moderate approach.
And that's absolute bullshit. We should not do that. It's absolute bullshit.
Okay.
But sorry, I want to keep going back to the Jennifer Walsh thing really quickly. So do you think that Democrats have literally written trans people out of existence? Or is that just hyperbole? Because if it's hyperbole,
of course, no,
fine.
it's hyperbole. Like Democrats are
okay.
Because the Democratic Party is a big tent party, but the Democratic Party also is, and this is just how it is for the Democrats in general.
Can I finish my thought really quickly? Can I finish this thought I was having really quickly? Sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
You said a minute ago, like, hey, don't I have? Sorry, no. I just want to finish this very, very quickly. You said a minute ago, like, hey, don't I have a more nuanced view than you would have thought that I had? And it's like, sure, but you're also just like saying two completely different things. You're giving a completely different argument. You've said, I'd vote third party because at that point it doesn't matter. And then you switch that to, at that point it's out of my You've basically said like all of these statements are hyperbole.
That was the argument that I was making.
But when you are repeatedly hyperbolizing the Democratic Party as being basically the same as the Republican Party, that creates a level of voter apathy. And I think that is why liberals on Twitter are very mad at you. I mean, of course, there's going to be like the crazy fucks who are always going to say some random shit. But I mean, like, I think that's the legit criticism that people have of the way that you approach this, is the way that you draw this false equivalency between the two parties. Okay. And then, like, when you get confronted on it, or when someone asks you about it, you're like, well, it's just hyperbole. It's like, no, like, we shouldn't hyperbolize about trans people, like, getting shot by... I know that that's not a serious thing you mean, of course. Yeah. I'm just saying we shouldn't, like, hyperbolize about how one party treats trans people versus another when there is a meaningful difference. And then when we're talking about the marginality between parties, you've said a bunch of times there's a marginal difference. You said Newsom would be marginally better than whatever the Republican is. But then when we talk about it, you say, no, there would be a meaningfully different outcome.
Marginal differences between both parties lead to meaningful differences for the marginalized identities. That is something that I have that's something that I've talked about for the past 10 years. This is something that I acknowledge. I don't think that there is no difference between two parties, except for certain issues. There are issues where there are no differences, or at least there is like broad consensus politics, right? And if you want to explore that, that's actually the biggest part of my argument. The consensus that, for example, healthcare is going to remain privatized, and that with the exception of a couple Democrats on the edges, right, the party is broadly seen as a party that also wants to maintain private health care, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Well, the Democrats want to maintain private health care. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh shit. Now oh god damn it. I'm effing now. Hold on one second. Oh god. I will vote for any Republican that fucking fixes my ISP. Any Republican that shatters the oligopoly of ISPs in major markets like California, I'm voting for. Fuck it. That's a joke, by the way. Don't take that seriously. I know this is a serious...
I was writing that down so I could quote it. Yeah. I was writing that down so I could quote it back at you later. And
yeah.
No. I'm all seriousness. I'm not trying to
I'll never advocate for Republicans. I'll never vote for a Republican. I fucking despise Republicans. So
I'm not trying to make it seem like I'm like here to like confront you on these quotes. Or
no,
anything.
It's fine.
I think this is where genuinely
this is a good conversation. This is a good conversation. Okay. So we were talking about like between the Republican Party wants to deregulate healthcare marketplaces even further at the behest of healthcare companies. Correct, right?
Yes.
And the Democratic Party's solution, at least post Barack Obama, has been at least to offer subsidies to the population, subsidies that end up still not tackling like the for-profit healthcare structure that exists, but tries to keep that system alive. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but just because Democrats are insufficient doesn't mean there's a marginal difference, and doesn't mean there's a marginal difference in outcome. Like we agree on this
the perspective, you see where I'm going with this from the perspective of the everyday working class individual. It's the difference between someone who is going to get their healthcare denied, right? because they just simply because they deregulated it. There's no more protections for people with any sort of health complications, right? Like let's say they're completely destroying that on the Republican side, and the Democrats are saying no, we need to keep the current system and we need to give the healthcare companies more subsidies so that at least like it's easier to pay for. Like you can still keep your coverage even with a pre-existing condition, but the healthcare premiums are going to continue to go up. From my perspective, harm reduction of that sort actually reflects the consensus between two parties, because the real two different planks here is private healthcare versus socialized healthcare. And the Democratic Party, unfortunately, unlike the Republican Party, is always judged by its weakest link. Because in order to advocate for more government in a country like the United States of America, where there's no confidence in the government and in the post-Reagan era, unfortunately for the Democrats, they will always be judged by whoever is a part of the rotating villain structure that ends up undermining the policy agenda that Democrats are running on. And from the perspective of the average person, from the perspective of the average American individual, they don't actually look at it and go, well, the Democrats are trying their very hardest to make sure that at least my health care is affordable. Some might, right? But most don't. Most look at it and go, okay, neither party is doing anything for me. What the fuck is this? So that is why I say, from the perspective of, for example, healthcare, this bipartisan consensus on private healthcare as opposed to socialized healthcare is a major one. The conversation should not be kept within the confines of what can we do within the private healthcare system. The conversation should expand to socialized healthcare versus privatized healthcare. And as long as the Democrats don't do that, the differences between them are marginal.
In policy, but not outcome.
Yes. Yeah,
okay,
because
that's a really important.
Yeah, because
that's a really important distinction.
I can celebrate Barack Obama's accomplishments of like adding pre-existing condition coverage to healthcare, or allowing people to stay under their parents' insurance program for 26 years old, or getting millions, tens of millions of people healthcare through Medicare funding, even though the Republicans basically stopped that in red states for a very long time, and it led to tens of thousands of people dying. But at the end of the day, from where I'm standing, from the way I approach the subject matter, the difference is Democrats are offering, let's say 100,000 people a year are dying. If 100,000 less people would die every single year if we had socialized medicine, and there was no issues between access to coverage at the point of purchase, right? Because it's free, versus 200,000 people die with the Republican agenda, but with the Democratic Party's agenda, 100,000 less people die. So the difference is still, from where I'm standing, 100,000 people that should get access to healthcare, but they're not getting access to healthcare.
Just because it's insufficient doesn't mean it's marginal in outcome, though. Like we agree on this. We totally agree on the difference between policy and outcome. And I could even concede that Democrats and Republicans in the capitalistic system, like I get what you're going at. They're both upholding the same liberal thing, but
there's also plenty of capitalist countries that already have these programs. I mean, virtually every single one of them does.
I still don't think you should say that there's a meaningful difference between the parties without saying you mean policy, because that could just, from my point of view, as a young 23-year-old dude, there's a lot of voter apathy in my generation. You obviously influence a lot of young people. And I have friends that I went to high school with that have texted me like before the 2024 election saying there's no difference between the parties. Both parties are the same. And we've obviously illustrated throughout this conversation, no, both parties are absolutely not the same.
Well, if they're watching me and not just watching the clips, they would know that there are differences. There are marginal differences in policy that yield massive differences in outcome. Having said that, however, another area where there's no difference, almost no difference whatsoever, is foreign policy.
Wait, another area where there's no difference?
Because there is one. So there is
a difference on healthcare, though. You said there was almost no difference. So we already established that there's a difference on trans issues. There's a difference on healthcare.
Yeah.
Meaningful outcomes on healthcare. Let's talk about foreign policy for a second.
But wait, before we move on to foreign policy, by the way, sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't correctly word that, but I'm going to get to the foreign policy thing in a second. You understand where I'm coming from, though, right? Like, because from the perspective of people that are not, from the perspective of the average American, the difference between being able to pay, $1,000 a month premiums and then having your service coverage denied at the aftermath of like a significant medical complication, and not having that at all, for tens of thousands of people is still it's still a devastating outcome, as opposed to the alternative, which is that they pay a significantly lower share in taxes and have that healthcare be financed by the government in a single payer style system. Like that's a massive difference, right? One that is the Democrats are not presenting as a unified vision.
Democrats are insufficient on healthcare. Yeah, I agree, but there's not a meaningful difference. Okay, so we went through trans issues. There's not a marginal difference there. There is a meaningful difference. We just talked about healthcare. I think that there is a meaningful difference between the parties, would you say, regarding outcomes?
No, what I'm saying is in terms of socialized
So you
medicine.
don't think there's a meaningful difference between outcomes between the Democratic and Republican Party on healthcare?
Between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, there is consensus on maintaining private healthcare. Would you agree?
There's a mortality gap. Yeah, but there's a mortality gap of 30,000 people that would have died over the past decade.
Yes,
my uncle,
absolutely.
when he was like 22 years old, got diagnosed with this rare form of cancer. The ACA saved his life. That's meaningful. This is meaningful to Americans. Is it insufficient? Absolutely. Should we spend as much time as we can pulling Democrats to a more, public option version of healthcare? Absolutely. We can do this as much as we want. But
if we're looking at numbers, though, what we're still getting back to is the very meaningful difference between socialized medicine and privatized healthcare. And the reality of the matter is that while the mortality gap exists between the Democrats subsidizing the healthcare system, even though maintaining its private structure.
Do you know what the numbers would exactly look like? So
I actually don't know what the. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know off the top of my head what the socialized medicine.
Let's say it is 100,000
like.
people. Do you think 30,000 of those people are marginal? Let's say it is an extra 100,000 people that would have died. Do you think those 30,000 people are marginal or meaningful?
No, You understand the argument I'm making, right? I'm saying that 100,000 more people would survive if they didn't have their medical care covered, or if they didn't have their medical care denied. There are people right now in the United States of America that choose to forego diabetes medication and die because they just simply can't pay for it. Like that's not that's. I think you and I both agree that that's completely unacceptable, right?
Absolutely. I think that the U.S. healthcare system is pretty awful.
From my perspective. And from my perspective, that is a meaningful difference, is what I'm saying, especially when compared to the consensus that is represented as far as maintaining a private healthcare system. So it's even a much larger number, is my point.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So I think that
because I will always agree with you when you say that Republicans are worse than the Democrats, regardless of like the hyperbole moments or whatever that people clip to present a false narrative that I very quickly will explain after the clip ends, usually, which is unfortunately outside of my hands because, we do live in a clip culture. It's people want to argue past one another. But
you seem to minimize how different the parties are a lot, though, like a lot. And it's harmful, dude.
Because,
like I said,
because
it creates voter apathy.
The perspective that I'm coming at is the fact that a Democratic Party that still maintains that same consensus on maintaining private health care
is still meaningfully better.
But it doesn't. It ultimately doesn't matter. Like in the grand scheme of things, if we're saving 100,000 lives, and the Democrats are saying no, we're only going to save 30,000 lives, then there's still 70,000 lives that are lost.
And that doesn't matter to you? What do you mean that doesn't matter?
I think we're talking past one another. There is a far larger number of people that are dying in the uniparty consensus.
Okay. I absolutely agree. There is a far larger number of people that are dying in the uniparty consensus, and due to that, the healthcare system needs to be reformed. It is currently insufficient, but I can grant that and both say the 30,000 people that have saved their lives are meaningful, as we've agreed. So I think that we don't have a disagreement on, like, that's the reason why I was also an advocate for the Democratic Party shutting down Congress when the Republicans were ironically trying to do the harm reduction narratives on their side, when they were like, well, every day that
every day that Congress is shut down, where we're not conceding to your very reasonable demands about funding healthcare and adding, the additional COVID subsidies back, you're allowing tens of thousands of, or if not millions of public workers to be furloughed and possibly die. Like, the point I'm trying to make is, in a much broader vision that is both politically beneficial, electorally beneficial, the Democrats refusing to take seriously, because of the donations that they get from healthcare companies that want to maintain, that have a financial interest in maintaining a private healthcare system. The Democrats are writing off the additional 70,000 people, and they're getting away with this argument by presenting it as a lesser evil argument, because it's true. Lesser evil argument is the lesser evil argument. The harm reduction theory is correct, but because of the harm reduction theory being correct, the Democrats lean onto that rather than actually advocate for a bold vision. And at times they even lose the election, but it seemingly doesn't matter, right?
I think what we should do before, the 2028 primaries is push our party as much as possible to reject the type of special interest groups that have led to this over the past decade, have led to the Democratic Party kind of feeding into this. But so I don't mean to keep hammering down on that point, but I do want to go to foreign policy, because I think we can illustrate that Can you just say if you agree, yes or no here? So the Democratic Party has meaningfully different outcomes when it comes to trans people. Yes, right? The Democratic Party has meaningfully different outcomes when it comes to healthcare.
The Democratic Party, marginal or not, in terms of their different approach to both, well, healthcare is even more marginal, but the Democratic Party's approach to these issues, from the perspective of the people that are receiving it, from the perspective of the people that are looking at it, from the way that they angle the conversation, the way that they move to a centrist position on a lot of these key positions, is marginally different, but marginal differences yield significant outcomes for the people.
So the average person views the policies as marginally different, even though they're the ones who are receiving the outcomes. Like the person who either gets insulin
100%. Do you think that the average American is making a reasonable, a rational decision when they're voting?
Not the average American, but the Americans that are affected. Like if you need insulin and you get rejected due to a Republican Party, that's meaningful. There's meaningful outcomes there.
And yet they still make irrational choices all the time. I mean, I think I didn't think you'd disagree with me on that. Yeah. Well, how many people with like immediate undocumented family members voted for Donald Trump?
Yeah, that's true. That's fair.
They are insanely irrational in their decision making. That's why I always say you have to have a definable agenda that makes you that makes you viable at the elections. There's two different problems here.
People are going to be irrational actors no matter what, though. People are going to be irrational actors no matter what.
That's why you got to fucking bludgeon them in the head. That's why you got to bludgeon them in the head in the same way that Republicans unfortunately do very well and they have less structural hurdles than the Democrats do, obviously, in this situation, but they bludgeon people in the head by saying, make America great again. Here's what those values mean. And then they just like add a bunch of nonsense into it. They engage in hyperbole. They regularly will be definable by their policies. Build the wall. It's like very simple. It's very simple stuff that they actively harp on. And the Democrats are constantly running on a defensive posture. And my argument is the reason why I think they're running on a defensive posture is because they can lean into the harm reduction narratives. Because the harm reduction narrative is a correct approach. It is correct in theory, but given that most voters are making irrational decisions, unless they're literally fucking bludgeoned in the head with it over and over again to spell out those party differences, they're not going to make a rational choice. And many of them are not even going to vote at all. My community, on the other hand, by the way, overwhelmingly voted for Kamala Harris, but that's besides the point. I mean, virtually every single person in my community voted for Kamala Harris, contrary to what people say.
If it's 2028, man, and we're running on like harm reduction narratives in the general, I will be very, very disappointed. I hope that we have I'm excited.
Okay, you'll be disappointed, so you understand what I'm saying, though, right? Then don't you feel like it would be out of your hands as far as like what you can do? Because at that point, I can. Out of my hands, what I can do to my audience. At that point, I can lie to my audience and be like, "No, you guys don't understand. Kamala Harris, when she says we're going to have the most lethal military, what she actually means is that she's going to be anti-war as opposed to Donald Trump." No one's going to fucking listen to me.
You say to your audience, "Listen, we had an ideological primary, and if Gavin Newsom is the nominee, This obviously did not go our way. We will continue to pressure his administration, but the difference between voting for Gavin Newsom and a JD Vance, or voting third party and abstaining and lowering the threshold for JD Vance to win, is the difference between quite literally 15 million people dying due to USAID cuts, which Gavin Newsom would restore. It's the difference between like a mother in Sudan having a malaria vaccine for their infant son versus that malaria vaccine not being there and the son dying. There's multiple studies and models showing that 12 to 14 million people will die by 2030 due to the cuts of USAID. And I think that it is the onus is on us in 2028, whether it's Newsom or another candidate, to be at the end of the day, be like, yeah, we have to suck it up and we have to not only just reduce harm marginally.
I hope that Gavin Newsom never runs on even if he's going to restore USAID, I hope he doesn't try to run on restoring USAID, because I feel like that will lead to a significant
defeat. He should not
defeat
run on restoring USAID.
No. Even if he's going to do it, I'm not even saying that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I'm saying he should not be. He should not be running around being like, I'm going to restore USAID. That's why you should vote for me.
No, that's totally fine. But this matters. There's
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you on that either.
So what do you mean? It's
maybe it'll come across as a shock for people, but
what do you mean it's out of your hands at that point? I don't think it's out of our hands at that point.
What is out of my hands is that no matter what if people ask me about, why Kamala Harris was not coming out and releasing a statement about the significant differences that she presented as opposed to the Biden administration's Gaza policy, because I think we agree that like she did not separate from Joe Biden in a meaningful way at all, right? Like she did, and that's a big part of why she lost. So So one of my biggest points of contention, especially leaving the DNC where I got basically blackpilled, I was like, I could not believe like how much people were celebrating it and how much people thought like, oh, we got this in the bag. When the situation on the ground showed a very different reality, at least from my perspective. When Kamala Harris refused to sever ties with Biden, and I know that would have been a complicated process regardless, and there would be a lot of drama surrounding it, but I think with expert messaging, that would have been very beneficial for Kamala Harris. Similar to like Mark Carney versus, Justin Trudeau, like cutting the dead weight, basically taking out an unpopular figure and then rising from the ashes and presenting a bold new vision. Even within 107 days, she could have, tried to do this. When they didn't do that, and they tried to win by, hugging and kissing Liz Cheney, and tried to win by like going after this mythical moderate voter in the exact ways that Matt Iglesias and Jonathan Chait and all these other people presented as a positive, like a lot of these commentary folk that the Democrats do listen to for some reason. I don't know why. When they ran around with this pivot to the center and kept repeating it, and the consulting class kept repeating that this was like the appropriate thing to do. When I had two options, I could have just been like, well, guys, you have to understand Kamala Harris is actually going to be much better than Donald Trump, which I did bring up with regular frequency, especially as it pertains to what Donald Trump was presenting, mass deportations and what that would look like. And there are many, many videos where I, presented how terrifying a vision Donald Trump was spelling for the future of the country versus what Kamala Harris was presenting, which conceded, because this was another holdover from the Biden administration, conceded that undocumented migrants were actually a national security interest, a national security issue, that they were actually leading to crime, and that the only solution was a compromise position that wasn't mass deportations, but instead was like, deportation of some. That was completely unnecessary, because the main point that the Republicans drove home was built around a lie that undocumented migrants are responsible for a higher share of per capita crimes than natural-born U.S. citizens are. That's never been the truth. Are you not
okay with some deportations if someone's actually committing crimes? Because the stats say that undocumented immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than native-born citizens. They commit crimes at very low rates. But if somebody does commit a crime and they're caught here, are you okay with deportation? say it's not ICE. Like after we abolish
it's
ICE.
entirely dependent on what the crime is, but I'm always going to be an advocate to make sure that like justice is served instead of like just immediately trying to deport someone. I would much rather have them sit in the prison system if they've done, especially if they've done a heinous crime, because there's no assurance that that person is actually going to stay in prison when they are sent to a different country. So
I actually don't even fault you for not endorsing Kamala in 2024. I mean, I personally think she was way, way better, and I'm sure that I mean, we can talk about the impacts that Trump has had, and we'd agree. But I mean, yeah, if she's gonna run in such a risk averse way, I can understand that. I just yeah, I think before we move on to the forward looking message,
like
of the Democratic Party,
my argument is Kamala Harris didn't present that vision appropriately, and that's why she lost. Like she should have sat there and been like, what do you guys think mass deportation is going to look like? This is verbatim, bar for bar, what I told both Democrat consultants and also party members, including Ro Khanna and many others, both privately and publicly. I was like, explain to people what fucking mass deportations are going to look like. You guys are running scared. I know you see the polls that say 66% of the public want mass deportations. They don't know what that looks like. It's up to you to explain to them what that looks like. And when they don't do that and they cede ground unnecessarily on this argument, they end up causing a spectacular defeat where Donald Trump does come in and actually does start the process of mass deportations. That was my argument. And that's precisely what I mean when I say it's out of my hands at that point, because no matter how much I yelled both at the Democrats, no matter how much I advocated for every single day about how devastating a vision Donald Trump would look like if he actually won, the Democrats still chose what they chose to do. That's what I mean when I say it's out of my hands. I don't know exactly how Gavin Newsom is going to run. We don't know yet. It's too far out. But my assumption when I say it's out of my hands is that Gavin Newsom represents the same old business as usual politics that Kamala Harris ran on, that Democrats have run on in the past, with the notable exceptions of Joe Biden and also Barack Obama. Both ran on an objectively progressive policy agenda. They didn't legislate that way, but they did, objectively run on a much bolder policy vision than they actually ended up fulfilling. But my point is, if you don't do that, if you don't run a bold policy agenda focused vision, you are going to lose to the Democrats. And I fear that that's what Gavin Newsom is going to do. And that's why I meant like it's out of my hands at that point. There's nothing I can do to salvage the reputation of the party, because I've been there. I've been there in 2016. I was there in 2020. Luckily, it worked out. And I was there in 2024, and it didn't work out again against Donald Trump. That's my argument.
Yeah, so I agree that Kamala Harris definitely should have taken more affirmative stances. One of my big problems with her is that she was super risk averse. I think that as a former prosecutor, there was a trope that she was just very meticulous with every single thing she does. And I think that's representative of a broader Democratic Party that is just very risk averse. And while they're risk averse, they'll also finger wag and shame you over and over for not voting for this candidate in that way. I mean, the Democratic Party definitely has me disillusioned. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it is out of your hands at that point. I mean, the messaging may be, like the messaging apparatus of the Democratic Party, if Newsom and Vance are the nominee, is not out of your hands. But there's still an entire administration that you can pressure and push if Newsom were to win in your direction. It's
yeah,
not.
I mean,
out
I'm
going
to keep
hands.
doing that
And
regardless.
You also said, but it's not what you said. It says at that point it doesn't even matter, and I can understand. That
yeah. What I meant, and if you listen to what the conversation I was having afterwards, is what I meant is like it's impossible. And this is a thing that I brought up over and over again with Kamala Harris in 2024, is that there's nothing I can do to outflank the party. And one example I'll give you, I think you'll agree with. Kamala Harris got $1 billion, right? Massive war chest. She comes in hot. She comes out with this, I thought it was going to be a visionary agenda. They choose Tim Walz. They're coming out of the DNC. I'm a little shook in my confidence in the party. And they dump $30 million to the television market in Pennsylvania. And the polls didn't even move a little bit. That was a major sign of alarm, major sign for concern for me. At the time, I said, this implies that people are hearing the message, but they're not identifying with it. They don't like it. They don't like what Kamala Harris is presenting, because at that point, no matter how much money you spend, no matter how much you tell people that you're going to be better, that you're going to be better than the Republicans, and here is why, they were not responding positively to it. And that should have been a really important point for Kamala Harris to pivot away, go back to the drawing board, and potentially come out with a more bold vision for change. They didn't do that. And that was that's precisely what I mean when I say it's impossible for me to outflank $1 billion of ad spend, Taylor Swift endorsements, Beyonce endorsements. I'm not saying I'm a small bean and I'm just like utterly irrelevant. Of course.
No, we're not. I don't even think you can change the results of the election. That's not even what I claim.
That's what a lot of people yell at me over. They make it seem like I was the singular kingmaker or something.
That's really dumb. And any liberals saying that dumb, any liberals saying that you need to line up behind Gavin Newsom, what the hell? It's 2 years out. Why do you think so many liberals were mad at that Jennifer Welch clip? Like, what's your steel, man, if I could ask?
What do I think about it?
Like, no, why do you think so many liberals on Twitter
I know. It's the same. It's the same reason why everyone said the Bernie bros were the reason why Hillary Clinton lost. It's the same reason why people still say third-party voters are the reason why Kamala Harris lost, even though if all third-party voters, I'm sure you know, voted for Kamala Harris, she still wouldn't have won the election. It's people looking for an alternative. It's not that their vision of what the Democratic Party should be doing is incorrect entirely. It must be something else. So they're just looking to blame someone else. And I'm fine being that guy. If they want to blame.
I honestly disagree. I think a lot of the liberals I talk to and a lot of the people in my audience don't think what you just said. I've got a massive liberal audience online.
Yeah,
I didn't ask them about this. I don't know. But I genuinely think a lot of the criticism I saw on Twitter goes back to the conversation that I was kind of trying to, like, not pin you down, but I was kind of trying to return to it over and over, is the way that you word these things on your stream. I genuinely think liberals take problem with that. I mean, yeah, some people will be looking for a scapegoat and will say that third-party voters like cost Hillary the election or cost Kamala the election. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's true in the case of Kamala, but I think that no one expects you to change the results of the election. Or maybe not no one. No reasonable person expects you to change the results of the election. No reasonable person expects you to jump up and down and start throating Gavin Newsom 2 years before we even have our candidates there. Like, no reasonable person is going to say, if you would have said, I refuse to pre-commit to any candidate and I want to use my leverage and I want to make sure that we have an ideological battle and I want to come out on top, I'm not going to commit to anyone. I think you could have minimized the amount of liberal damage. And you did explain right after why you didn't vote for Kamala and how it was the same.
The clip was way before. The clip ended way before that.
Yeah, but you're saying something different too now. You're saying it's out of your hands, but you did word it, and you're live a lot every single day, so you can't word everything perfectly, but you literally said at that point it doesn't even matter. One day prior, you said, like, Newsom is marginally better. When liberals see all of this in totality, it's like, wow, this guy doesn't think that the Democrats are even different, and this guy has a lot of apathy towards who wins. It came off as apathetic. And, like, I mean, I think there's a common criticism online.
Do you feel like some people want to feel like I'm apathetic? Do you feel like, well, one, there's two different reasons for, there's two different things I want to mention here. One, the plurality doesn't vote, and therefore the plurality is apathetic, right? My audience, as I've demonstrated already, is not apathetic, and they are voting for the Democratic Party when push comes to shove.
I think the plurality would be less apathetic if we could illustrate more. I think the plurality is apathetic because people say there's a marginal difference between the parties.
Okay.
If we could illustrate.
This is a good point. So you think it's people like myself and others that are creating this apathy and not the multi-billion-dollar messaging infrastructure of the Democratic Party that is making it seem as though the differences are either completely irrelevant for them, or inconsequential.
No, I think it could be both. It can be both, and two things can be true at once.
So
the Democratic Party is definitely insufficient. No.
But that was the point I was making.
I was saying, like, incredibly insufficient. Okay, sorry, keep going.
Sorry. Well, that is precisely my point, which is that I can't outflank the party. If the party is constantly communicating that, like, they're going to be moderate, they're going to have only marginal differences, but, like, they're going to be the adult in the room, and that's what they're communicating. My reflection on that as being devastating is not going to actually change people's minds that were going to previously vote for the Democratic Party and don't. And that's precisely the reason why virtually everyone in this community voted for Kamala Harris, regardless of the setbacks that she, regardless of her election hangups. And that's the reason why I don't necessarily care what liberals say on the internet. Like, if they want to yell at me, it's fine. But one of the things that they consistently mention is like, oh, he's popular because he's shitting on the Democrats. And that is the problem. Like, you're basically recognizing that the Democratic Party is an incredibly unpopular brand. And we have to fix that. If you want the Democrats to actually consistently and reliably win elections, which I care a lot more about the policy agenda than I do about, like, Democrats as a brand, as a party winning, right?
Sure.
So that is the issue. And these guys don't understand that that's the issue, and constantly recycling harm reduction narratives over and over again doesn't actually make people on the outside, the plurality of voters that do have that apathy, take a different look at the Democratic Party. It just makes Democrats look like smug elitist assholes who are entitled to your vote. And for them,
I think it can be both and. It can be both and. The Democratic Party definitely needs to message better and draw the difference better. But I also think that the way that you speak about it, I'm not blaming it all on you, by the way, not even blaming it mostly on you. I think that the way people speak about it as if the parties are the same does create that type of apathy as well. When they're not the same, we've walked through this entire stream how there are meaningful differences.
You do recognize. I talk about the differences. If people that were watching the clips actually came and tuned into my to my live broadcast, or even watched any of the YouTube videos or whatever, they would know that that's not all I say.
No,
right?
I watched multiple full-length videos, and you really blur the lines. And I'm not gonna, when your audience, you do in the video, you said two things back to back. You said Democrats have literally written you out of existence. Later on, you say Democrats would essentially shoot you. It's fine to use hyperbole, but then
you're bringing up two clips. Those
are two different clips. No. It's in the same video, though. It's the same video.
I know, but I already explained to you that. But there's additional things I say in between those two clips.
Between these two strong declarative statements, you for a second say, yeah, sure, being a trans person in a blue state is probably better than a red state. And then you go back to saying the next statement.
The idea that and there are a million examples I can show you if you want to see it, but the idea that I don't actually maintain the validity of the harm reduction argument, I just don't present it as the number one solution. I recognize that there is a difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The clips that people oftentimes will recirculate will be on issue-specific things like Israel, Palestine, like the continuation of genocide, right? Like, both off of the genocide that unfolded when Joe Biden was president and Kamala Harris was vice president, and also the way that Kamala Harris communicated about what she would do differently from Joe Biden, which was unfortunately nothing, right? Like, there are certain aspects of we have a difference of opinion, or we have a different approach between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party that's just like not translating to the population at all. And there's good reason for them to actually, there's good reason for the average person to not think that there's any major difference between the two parties. As far as genocide is still genocide. One is being conducted in a way where Trump is also saying additional unhinged shit. The other one is being conducted where Joe Biden keeps saying, oh, we have red lines, and then Benjamin Netanyahu keeps crossing them, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think the Democrats need to stand the fuck up, and I think that this is an issue where Democrats definitely need to be meaningfully better than Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even just like because it's electorally beneficial. It's also unconscionable in general. And that was the reason why I said that given both Kamala Harris's lack of interest in like communicating a different vision for what will happen with her leadership between, United States and Israel, and given her tendency to lean into Joe Biden's agenda on migration,
people were looking for
the right-wing bill,
sure.
The right-wing bill that they passed, that they packaged as a bipartisan bill that was like almost single-handedly written by that fucking Oklahoma senator that basically offered money to build the wall. Like, all of these things that they went back on, people are people are stupid, but they're not that stupid, right? If you say you're like anti-build the wall for years and years, and then you're like right before the election, on October 6, 2023, you unveil a spending package that has money to build the wall, people are going to look at that and go, oh, so Republicans were right all along that immigrants do constitute a national security threat, and you guys were just lying to us. And all you end up doing in that situation is you don't get the moderates to come to your side to go, well, there's a reasonable immigration agenda here, and the Democrats are the only party that's going to advance this reasonable immigration agenda. No, most people in the Democratic Party say, oh shit, I guess undocumented migrants are doing and the decapitations or whatever the Trump administration is saying.
I think
maybe they were right.
Kamala was pretty clear that that's not true, though. I mean, Kamala drew the line. I don't think she played into Trump's anti-immigration criminal rhetoric as much as
but
he did.
The concession is within the legislation. The concession, you don't come forward with well, first of all, she had plenty of, I'm going to be strong on the border videos.
Wait, were you okay with strengthening the border from Biden era? Did you want to continue Biden era policies? Because right now,
I thought the Biden era policies were horrendous because the first 100 days of immigration that he ran on, he did not accomplish at all. If you go back to 2021, I believe it's in the month of February, where I said, if the Biden administration, when the images came out of Customs and Border Patrol whipping the Haitian migrants at the Texas border, you remember they had the reins on horseback? And I said, the Biden administration promised a comprehensive first 100 days of dealing with the humanitarian crisis at the border. And they had a lot of really good policies in there. And those policies were supposed to revolve around expeditious processing of migrants that are coming in and offering them temporary protected status, going through expeditiously on their asylum applications, and making sure that they are relocated, appropriately all around the country. And they got so scared that the Republicans started instantly hitting the immigrants are coming in to do rapes lines over and over again, that they completely backed away from it. And they thought, as long as we don't address it, it'll go away. And then Greg Abbott came out, Ron DeSantis came out, and they did the whole human trafficking scheme, if you remember, where they took undocumented migrants that had crossed the border to legally apply for asylum, and then they shipped them to Long Island and all these other places with the express purpose of ruining the immigration process that was already underfunded. At the time, I said, Joe Biden needs to punish Greg Abbott. He needs to throw Greg Abbott in prison for human trafficking. He needs to do the same thing for Ron DeSantis. He needs to play hardball. They didn't do that. No one was held accountable. And all it did was create a $12 billion budget shortfall in places like New York City that the federal government did not give immediate aid to, that they could not give immediate aid to, because they purposely bricked the immigration system that exists. Because these guys are supposed to be processed in Texas. The courts have adequate funds to have these guys be processed in the state of Texas, right? And they didn't do that. They didn't do any of that. And that's the reason why over the course of the 3 years, Joe Biden went from having a popular agenda on immigration, winning the popular vote, on a much more progressive agenda on combating immigration with a more humanitarian framework, moving towards amnesty, which again has always been broadly popular as opposed to mass deportation. And he didn't do that. And then they conceded on the right-wing attitude, on the white nativist anti-immigrant sentiment. And that's the reason why they lost the election.
Yeah, I think that Biden's immigration policy left a huge vacuum for Donald Trump to then come in with the most far-right immigration policy possible. I don't think they tried to act like all immigrants were criminals or tried to demonize them in the same way. But yeah, they absolutely messed up. And that kind of brings me to like a more affirmative message for the Democratic Party and how we need to not only run on things that excite people, run on things that actually turn people out.
It wasn't just Biden, by the way. Democrats completely conceded on the issue of immigration. You don't agree? Like as a national party. As a national party.
I think that the Democrats are kind of just moving where most Americans are. They're just basically saying we should have a stronger border. We should make sure that people can come here legally in a safe way. We should make sure that people can come contribute to this country. But I think they're trying to end the abuse of the asylum process we saw under Biden. I don't agree that have they conceded fully to Republicans? Is that what you're asking me? No, Democrats have not conceded fully to Republicans.
No, not fully. Have they conceded the Republicans on the false notion that immigrants constitute a national security threat? You think?
I haven't seen that. No. Wait.
You don't think that the October 6th, 2023 bill was a concession to the faulty notion, the
one written by Langford?
Yeah. The one that...
Can you name one mainstream Democrat who's called immigrants a national security threat?
No, of course not. But that bill was packaged as a reasonable and just approach to the problem of criminal migration, like migration that was, and also then there's like the Lake and Riley Act and all this other stuff that came along after
bill,
Donald Trump.
I think that bill increased funding for asylum judges so that asylum seekers could be processed in a more speedy way. The bill was absolutely not perfect, but after 2 years of Biden, were we even in the majority when they were trying to pass this bill?
Biden went in and acted as though this was a bipartisan bill with little to no, and this is according not to me, but to numerous other advocacy organizations that said that this bill, unlike any other Democratic Party bill that was ever passed on immigration, that was ever advocated to pass on immigration, had little to none in terms of what you're talking about in terms of the courts. There was some funding for the courts, but the bulk of the courts was going to...
It looks like Kamala ran on a stronger pathway to citizenship, too.
The bulk of the funding... Hold on. The bulk of the funding went to... the apprehension, the ICE facilities, Department of Homeland Security, and funds that were about combating immigrant crime. Like, that was the main focus of it. And the Democrats still had some residual fears about that, which is precisely the reason why a bunch of Democrats not only have voted to fund ICE, both under the Biden administration or give additional funds to ICE, but then also on top of that, voted for the Lake and Riley Act, which was heinous. I think you and I both agree on that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and the reason why they found themselves with their pants down now when the issue has completely swapped to our side, my side, maybe not even the Democratic Party side necessarily, the way that they were communicating around it, because you still had Chris Murphy in I believe January or February talking about how, well, Joe Biden actually deported more migrants than Donald Trump did, but he didn't do it in such violent ways, as though that's like somehow supposed to be better, because all of that is a concession that like migrants need to be removed from the boundaries of the state. Like, there's no need to make a concession like that, because you and I both agree that migrants are our neighbors. The difference between an undocumented person and a documented person is paperwork. That for 23 years prior to the existence of the Department of Homeland Security, were there deportations? Of course there were, every now and then. Having said that, they were conducted by the INS. It wasn't like this militant organization known as ICE that was specifically doing interior removals, because it was a civil offense. It was a paperwork violation. And that's what I want to get back to. I want to bring the clock back to a time where we had a more reasonable approach, because this is a nation comprised of entirely immigrants, with the exception of the indigenous population and black people.
If you could choose how the Democratic candidate in 2028, even throughout the primary, messages on immigration, how do you think they should do it for the vast majority of American people who think that Biden was weak on the border? And this is just what people think. I mean, I think that Biden had a lot of errors, and I think a lot of American people think that he was incredibly weak on the border. That obviously led a pathway to Donald Trump. Kamala Harris, obviously, I don't even think she conceded as much as you're saying. I mean, her platform looks to me like it was
counter message. No, at no point do you cede ground.
Kamala Harris
to the
was running on a pathway to citizenship.
Yeah, so was Joe Biden, and then he didn't actually do that at all. That's my point. Like, the amnesty framing is good, but that wasn't not only was that not the primary vehicle of her immigration agenda, the primary vehicle of her immigration agenda was the bipartisan bill that was actually more reasonable, and that Donald Trump was actually trying to undermine that because he wanted to use immigration as like a talking point, right? Like, that was the communication strategy.
Kamala didn't run on Langford's bill. Kamala did not run on Langford's bill. Kamala ran Kamala ran on a pathway to citizenship, and I believe they did talk about how mass deportations would be bad. Definitely not sufficiently
No,
enough.
they ran border ads like talking about how she prosecutes transnational gangs. Like they were very clearly communicating that they were going to take a much harder approach because they were afraid. They were running scared, and they were afraid of the.
So how, if you're the
66%
Democratic
of Americans
candidate,
saying that they want mass deportation, they saw that poll and they freaked the fuck out.
if you're the Democratic candidate in 2028, how do you message around this so that people in America don't think you're weak and soft on the border like Biden was? Not saying you are, I'm just saying so people don't get the idea that it's going to be another Biden.
Yeah, there's also like Kamala Harris did blame Donald Trump over and over again for killing Langford's bill, by the way, like including in debates. You know that, right?
I think that she's trying to illustrate the point that Trump doesn't care about immigration.
Yeah, but what does that say to the average person? That doesn't say that Kamala Harris is not running.
That Trump and the Republicans are not going to responsibly deal with this issue in a long-term way, that they're likely just going to use this as a political cudgel and then do mass deportations that are violent.
Adam, I think, look, I'm not your enemy, but I do think you're debating a little bit here. I think the whole point is that was a failed strategy, and Donald Trump ended up winning on immigration because
I agree.
Kamala Harris was presenting herself as accepting of the right-wing framing that the Langford bill was good, and that the Langford bill was also presented as like a very militant approach to immigration because they were afraid. They were afraid that they saw those polls that says 66% of people want mass deportation. It never should have gotten to that point. It never should have gotten to that point at all, right? Like no one in America should have ever said 66% of us believe in mass deportation. We're a nation of immigrants. It got to that point, and guess what? Even then, the polls also still showed that given the option between mass deportation and mass amnesty, Americans have never historically chosen mass deportation over mass amnesty. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. But what's your affirmative message?
But you would have known that if you watched me, or even if you watched my Ro Khanna video or my Ro Khanna conversation, because I brought it up to Democrats over and over again. This is what I'm saying. Like, this is I have a broad vision for a better future, and I try to communicate that to the Democrats to the best of my ability. If they don't want to fucking listen, it's out of my hands. And that goes back to the same point. I want to have a conversation with Gavin Newsom. I want to communicate to Gavin Newsom what these spectacular failures look like. But if he's too busy yucking it up with fucking Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, talking about how his son is a major Charlie Kirk fan, talking to Ben Shapiro and apologizing to Ben Shapiro on Israel not being a genocide, or apologizing to Ben Shapiro about what his like social media team said about ICE.
I don't run Gavin Newsom's podcast strategy. I don't know. But
but his podcast strategy is deliberate because he wants to, he thinks, faulty or not, that if he communicates a certain attitude to as many people as possible, that he positions himself as a moderate figure who's going to be tough on crime, who's actually going to be conciliatory to Republican figureheads, that's how he's going to win the fucking election. And I have no other way to approach what his advocacy is going to look like, what his policy agenda is going to look like this far out. But my assessment is, judging by his pivot to the center attitude with his policies that he's presenting on the podcast that he's doing so that he can win the election, so that he become the presidential candidate, judging off of that, there's not anything I can do. It's out of my hands if he runs in the same way that Kamala Harris did.
I think that's why we pressure them hardcore in the primary. But I do want to ask, so you're running Newsom's campaign. I guess we don't have to use Newsom as a stand-in.
No, we can use Newsom as a stand-in. Okay. There's good stuff. There's good stuff in Newsom.
Okay, so you're running it. How do you model the immigration platform so that you don't scare off people, and that you also have an affirmative, exciting message that's pro?
Yeah, we're a nation of migrants. Donald Trump and the Republican reactionary forces are constantly pitting neighbor against neighbor. These people are the backbone of the American economy, and they've been here for 10 plus years. They've worked tirelessly to make sure that you have fucking tomatoes and tomatoes in your salad and guacamole on your Chipotle
so far, this is the Democratic
Chipotle burritos.
Stance.
What?
So far, that's the Democratic Party stance entirely.
No, hold on. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to fucking concede on Langford bills or say that like ICE is supposed to exist in the way that it does at all. I there is a clear difference between someone like myself and the way that Gavin Newsom is communicated thus far, or the way that like the National Democratic Party is currently being perceived, right? The reason why we think they're being weak is because they are too conciliatory. They say, oh, people want to abolish ICE. It now has like plurality. And yet the major Democrats are refusing to say that. And they're saying, no, ICE actually wants body cameras. Technically, from a harm reduction standpoint, body cameras are better than no body cameras, right? Even though Jonathan Ross was filming himself when he shot Renee Good, technically body cameras could potentially bring about some semblance of accountability. That's harm reduction. But the difference shouldn't be between body cameras versus no body cameras. The difference is abolish ICE versus keep ICE at the current level of funding versus take ICE's funding away, then inevitably abolish it and go back to the previous structure that existed where the Department of Homeland Security wasn't this massive Palantir-backed Israel-style surveillance apparatus, but instead was there was a more just process that actually yielded American prosperity for decades and decades when people knew that they could come here and work hard and become an American citizen, because that's what's beautiful about the United States of America. No matter where you come from, you can't live in Turkey and become Turkish. You can't live in England and become English. But if you live in the United States of America, you can become American. You know who said that? Ronald Reagan. That's who fucking said that. And that's what I would say. I would be like, listen, that's the beauty of America. And the Republican Party of today has become this hate-mongering behemoth at the behest of the billionaire pedophilic cabal. We're no longer entertaining these false notions that pit neighbor against neighbor. And we're going with a bold and radical vision that says you work hard and you get more of an earning. You get a bigger percentage of the pie that you have actually created. We're going to work. We're going to work at the behest of the working class. We're no longer going to care about the billionaire files. We're going to arrest them. We're going to apprehend them if they're doing crimes. We're going to bring about accountability. That's the way I would go about it.
I also think that after ICE is abolished, which I totally agree, we should be running on all of this, but after ICE is abolished, I think that Democrats need to run on something like a new law that has criminal penalties for any government actors that just recklessly, knowingly, or purposefully violate Americans' rights. That's a framework that we're working on because a lot of it's inside the Civil Rights Division, which Trump has totally corrupted and which people have resigned from like multiple times since Renee Good was shot. So I do think that Democrats need to run on a more affirmative immigration message. That's what I've been working on as well. I've been appealing a lot to my family who moved from Syria in the early 80s and saying that, look, they became incredibly successful, have hired dozens of families, or hired dozens of people, fed dozens of families. They have, helped build a great community in Indiana. But yeah, I agree that Democrats need to run like that.
Okay,
I mean, we don't disagree.
But okay, so the last question I have for you is, because it seems like you want to be done with this conversation. I totally understand. No. Okay, because Kamala Harris also vowed to sign the border bill that Trump derailed, as she spoke about on her DNC speech as well, where because they were presenting it as like Trump is a derailer. Trump is actually not serious about tackling the immigrant crime narrative, and that they were that they were going to be serious, unlike Donald Trump, which. Again, I kept saying over and over again that was a major mistake. But if, let's say, Gavin Newsom runs scared in a similar fashion, do you feel like we will be able to overcome voter apathy, or should we rely on how scared people are with how devastating Trump has been, and hope that like whoever the Democratic Party presents is going to eke out a marginal victory?
No, wait, should we rely on harm reduction narratives is what you're asking?
Well, my point, the thing that I'm trying to present to you is that if Gavin Newsom, the way that he's communicated so far on his podcast and whatnot, if that materializes into his like presidential candidacy, and he puts a bit out there for himself, as a guy who is going to run scared or going to be more moderate than the way that the Democrats have been presented so far, they're too woke, all this stuff, and goes along with that. And then he ends up losing to J.D. Vance. Do you feel like that will be because of people like yourself and myself who had differences in opinion with Gavin Newsom, who still tried their very best to communicate that like J.D. Vance is going to be, even more devastating and somehow more Palantir backed than this current administration? Or do you think it'll be in the hands of the Democratic Party at that point?
I agree with you. I've agreed with you this entire time. It's in the hands of the Democratic Party. It's in the hands of, honestly, us to have a good ideological battle and make sure that whoever wins the primary is somebody who is not going to run or concede to Republicans. My entire thesis this time has not been that, or my thesis the entire time has not been that it's us that does this. I think that it's on the Democratic Party. Absolutely.
Okay, I think a lot of people that yell at me don't want to come to terms with that reality, because that's my argument. I'm like,
listen. It's not your fault if the Democratic Party loses. It's not your fault if Gavin Newsom wins the primary. My entire point earlier, and the steel man I was trying to make for the liberal movement, is just responsible platforming and speaking about the Democratic Party in a way that doesn't minimize the gap. And I disagree with you that that's just based on clips that have been spread out there. I watched a decent amount of your content. It just felt like there was a repeated minimization, but
yeah. There is sorry, I'm getting blasted. I just look, simply put, I my community, myself, like we work hard to get Democrats elected. It's the only feasible option for people who are on our side of the ideological spectrum. There's no third party viability. And also, I've never, contrary to what people think, I've never actually supported Jill Stein. For the record, I told people that I won't endorse Kamala Harris. Having said that, if there's one person I would urge people not to vote for, it's Donald Trump. And I also did communicate to people that Jill Stein is, a little bit of the closest I would ever arrive at like someone being an op, right? Someone who is just materialized every 4 years. A lot of people got mad at me for that. That's just my assessment, and I stand on that.
Yeah.
Having said that, the reason why I did not go out on an affirmative campaigning for the reason why I didn't affirmatively campaign for Kamala Harris over and over again is because of the things that I just already explained to you, and I think you seemingly agree with that, and that's precisely where I'm at as far as like where the blame lies. I think at the heart of the Democratic Party, there's still this attitude that like Democrats are entitled to the votes of marginalized people. Democrats are entitled to the votes of the working class, because after all, the Republicans are far, far worse for labor rights than the Democrats are. And this is true, right? But why don't people recognize that? Why do they still go back to culture war narratives? That is what I want to solve. And I know what the reason for that is. And I think a lot of people don't want to recognize that. A lot of people that say, no, you're wrong, and the Democrats keep losing because you're just not voting hard enough for them, don't want to recognize that Democrats are judged by their weakest members as a national party. They are judged by the Joe Manchins. They're judged by the Kirsten Sinemas. They're judged by Mark Kelly sometimes when he's being weak on union-related issues. They're not, and it's totally understandable that they're judged by the weakest figures in the party, because those weakest figures in the party are the ones who actually completely destroy the comprehensive policy agenda of the Democrats. And because I will constantly shift the blame back to people in positions of power, whether it be the Democratic Party or the National Party, or their capabilities to whip these votes that are necessary to go forward with a comprehensive vision that they advocated for, understandably, when that legislation doesn't happen, people look at it and go, okay, so you're not on my side. Like, you're just not on my side. You don't care about these issues. That's the real reason. And that's why there's such a massive disconnect between a lot of consultants and the public in general. I see it all the time with the consultants that I read, with the writers that I read, where they constantly talk about, like, why don't the labor movement understand that the Democrats are far better? Joe Biden walked the picket line, right? I mean, Joe Biden walked the picket line for the UAW. That's massive. That's unheard of. There's no president I don't think any American president has ever walked an active picket line, right? That's a huge deal. And yet the labor union, or the rank and filers in many of these labor unions, still ended up voting for Donald Trump. Why is that the case? Don't you want to find out why?
Yeah, because obviously the average person didn't understand what was happening.
No, it's not the reason. That's not the only reason, rather. because harm reduction doesn't fucking work as a
I agree with you on
driving
that, though.
force.
Yeah, I've agreed with that.
And
I've agreed.
the average person, you know what the average rank and filer thinks? They think at the end of the day, they stopped the rail strike. And I fucking consistently kept explaining to rank and file union members that are in my chat, labor organizers in my chat, that the Biden administration quietly actually made the railway companies concede on some of the demands that were being made by the unions. But they didn't care because they stopped a fundamental vehicle of change for the labor unions when they openly went out and said, you can't strike. You can't do a railroad.
I agree with you that harm reduction isn't a sufficient way to sell our policies. I've said that a few times. I definitely think we need something more affirmative. I just have you been following the Tallarico versus Crockett primary in Texas at all?
Yeah, I mean, I that one's a doozy.
Dude, this one's really blackpilling me on the way that like the way that people listen. I really respect Jasmine Crockett as a candidate or as a person. I think she's a firebrand who's stuck at the Trump and was a great representative of that district. But the way that people are attacking anyone online who endorses Tallarico is really just not cool. I've seen my friends get called like white supremacists.
Yeah, this is the James, not James Gandolfini. This is the meme of the first time when we're at the gallows, and I'm like, first time? This
James
is what
Franco,
it is.
yeah.
Look, I've been doing this since 2016. Yes.
No, I don't like the identity politics like weaponization either, but I don't even think that just happens from liberals. I see it happening on both sides. You know what's interesting? The way that I saw Tallarico people being attacked by Crockett supporters, I've seen it happen from lefties to liberals, liberals to lefties. I just think that online Twitter conversations are absolute trash. But yeah, Tallarico's platform is really solid. I think he would be really good in the Senate. And I don't like the way that this primary is being conducted.
No, I don't either. But unfortunately, that's been a primary method that Democrats, especially establishment Democrats, have deployed against the left with regular frequency. And
most of my establishment audience is very pro Tallarico. I don't think like
but there's a lot of people. There are a lot of people that
there's like random creators or whatever.
Yeah, there are a lot of random creators on the internet that will deploy those cynical lines of attack. And not only that, but when asked, okay, well, where were you for Ilhan Omar when she was being unjustifiably smeared all up and down the timeline? Where were you for Cori Bush? Where were you for Jamal Bowman? Where are you now for Summer Lee when she needs, help every now and then? They're noticeably absent from that conversation because there is an ideological slant there. There is an ideological slant there where they think these guys are actually different than the establishment Democrats. It's actually not on the basis of a defense against white supremacy at all. It's almost always about potentially where they're getting their bag from. That's what I think, at least. Or
yeah, I mean, I want to say on that note, like I see that you've been talking a lot about Chorus on your timeline too. I know a lot of Chorus creators who are very pro Tallarico, so I don't think they're being paid to be pro Crockett. I think
no. I don't think Chorus has like a whip over all of their creators at all. I don't think they're like, you have to go out and like attack Hasan.
I think there's a lot of unfair attacks against Chorus. I get it. I'm not even a part of Chorus. I've never taken money from them. I was like on one meeting when they launched, but I think that it's a pretty solid group that is not funded by Israelis. I don't know. There's a lot of really pro Palestine people in the group.
I don't know who's in the group. That's kind of a part of the, we don't know exactly who's in the group, and we don't know who's.
Some people have openly talked about it and have said that there's like, there's people who have said openly that they're part of Chorus and have also called Joe Biden Genocide Joe. I see a lot of people in my comments always asking me like, are you taking Chorus money? Is that why you're such a liberal or whatever? And it's like, no, I mean, I think there's a lot of really unfair attacks of Chorus when it's just,
I think Chorus is a good answer to, like the Daily Wire, where it is like, there is a necessity to combat Republican disinformation. There's an endless faucet of money that is being dumped into quote unquote independent media from the exact same corporate benefactors that fund the Republican Party, that fund the think tanks, that run ads on Fox News. And I think that there needs to be a faucet of pro-Democratic Party content out there that is addressing that misinformation, that's fighting against that. I agree with it on principle. I personally don't think that you should take any money whatsoever. There's plenty of people that have approached me to give me money for my advocacy, whether it be like PACs or advocacy groups. Like I don't think you should do that on principle. That's what I think. I think that is that's what's so good about being an independent content creator is that you can be beholden to your audience and your audience only. And you can, I mean, that's part of the reason why my only revenue comes from not even like sponsors or anything, but people subscribing to my Twitch channel. I think that gives you longevity as well. It gives you editorial independence. Having said that, what I was talking about with like the one chorus content creator was he was straight up in the tank for Wesley, what's his name? Wesley Bell in Missouri. I mean, that is Wesley Bell was entirely an AIPAC puppet. $20 million in that race against a wonderful person, Cori Bush, who was a spectacular fighter, who was an incredible champion of human rights and was a fantastic congressperson. And Israel literally straight up punished her because she was right too early. And that chorus creator saying, fuck Cori Bush. I don't like Cori Bush. I love Wesley Bell. I'm like, okay, like chorus creators who are known to be chorus affiliated shouldn't be running around saying shit like that, because then you look like you're being paid by Israel. That's my point. Like
I absolutely agree. But your tweet kind of reads like you were implying that Chorus is like full of Israeli assets. I don't know. I think that
I think there are a lot of content creators that are obviously more establishment Democrat aligned,
and that's just it happens to
working
be like
with
that,
Chorus that just happen to. That happened to maybe not talk about Israel as much. I don't think that it's like being paid by Israel. What?
You don't think they're being paid to not talk about Israel? You just think they happen to not talk about it?
Yeah, I think it's a self-selecting group of people. But there are some people, from what I understand, that are also chorus content creators who are outspoken on the issue of genocide.
Yeah, that's fair. I see a lot of unfair attacks, but
I think it's just that's how it works in not to bring up manufacturing consent so close to Noam Chomsky's new revelations and his connection to Jeffrey Epstein, but usually it's a self-selecting process. It's not people are not being bribed to do something. People are more so already inclined to do something, and then they are the ones who rise up through the ranks or get rewarded for it. And I do think that if the project of Chorus is supposed to defend the Democratic Party, then of course the people that they're going to select for the most part are going to be people who defend the party. And if the party is defending Israel, then they're also going to be going after people who, for the most part, defend Israel.
If you could ask Gavin Newsom a few questions, what would you want to ask him?
Oh, I have so many questions to ask him. I wonder how he thinks he will overcome the "Don't California my state" narrative that will destroy his campaign. I would ask him why his solution to combating homelessness after years and years has not been around a housing first policy, and instead it's just been riddled with like institutional hurdles, hang up after hang up, an overall refusal to try to fix the housing market in the state of California, which has some of the most expensive housing markets in the world. Those would be probably my main concerns, because like I think Gavin Newsom's going to get hit on everything, but I think if I were to think of like the most consequential thing for Gavin Newsom, it would be housing. Also, why won't he talk to me? That's the other thing, because I know that he has fans of mine that work on his team that I've like communicated with, and he's done basically every podcast but mine for some reason.
I have no clue.
I think I know why.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to have a contentious conversation with someone that will come at him from his left flank.
Well, dude, it seems like we agree on a lot, which we predicted. I think that we agree on a lot of the flaws of the Democratic Party, and even a lot of the prescriptions. But yeah, I mean, I hope I was able to at least bring the strongest liberal argument as to why people are mad at you online. I genuinely do think that there are some very valid criticisms, and I tried to bring them up, and we talked about them. But yeah, I mean, people are always going to throw unfair shit around, and I think there's a stronger argument to be made.
Yeah, I mean, look, if there's one takeaway that I hope liberals who came in here like that wanted you to fucking destroy me in the marketplace of ideas came in, if there's one thing that they should sincerely listen to me on, it's that I first and foremost despise the Republican Party and I want to destroy the Republican Party. And my criticisms of the Democrats stem from sometimes their closeness to the Republican Party and their conciliatory tone to Republican policies. Because I personally believe that that's not only bad politics in general, because it makes people just go, okay, I guess the Republicans are right. And I also believe that it's bad policy in general as well. Because I don't want a D name associated with reactionary policy making and then assume that it's still going to be far better than whatever the fucking Nazi party is going to present. Because they will always destroy the Democrats when it comes to being more militant, when it comes to being more racist. You can never outflank the Republicans on hatred. You cannot present a more moderate approach to hatred. It's just not going to work. And that's the reason why there have been a sequence of electoral defeats over and over again. But I do think that most liberals are finally waking up to that reality, that the electability argument is not on the side of moderates, but instead on the side of people like Bernie Sanders.
I'm excited to have a good primary. Who would you who's your dream ticket right now? Or I guess who do you want to see just like in the primary put up a fight? I like
the candidates I like are, I mean, obviously AOC, Ro Khanna, Chris Van Hollen. I would say those are, and then my sleeper pick, depending on how he, like, of course, I love Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and stuff, but like, I'm talking about like who has ambitions for higher office in general, and Summerlee as well. But as far as like the three contenders that I brought up, those are three. The dark horse is, again, entirely dependent on how they would design their campaign. But like someone like Jon Stewart could be interesting. Even though I don't think he's even remotely invested in that. Or like a Sean Fain, for example, like an outsider pick. And then my sleeper pick, once again, depending on how he actually communicates on the issue of Israel, because he's both been really good early on and then really bad. Jon Ossoff. I think Jon Ossoff is the reason why I call him a sleeper pick is because I think he's a very interesting guy. I think he is more progressive than he lets on. And that's and I'm saying this only as someone who's like paid very close attention to how he has communicated at times. And my chat is already fucking up my ass for saying that. Jon Ossoff, when it was not even remotely favorable to do so in fucking Georgia, came out and had an anti-Israel position out of nowhere. And he's Jewish. And he came out. And then he got fucking yelled at, like every like Jewish advocacy organization immediately came after him and were like, what the fuck are you doing? What the fuck are you saying? And he quickly conceded. He was like, oh, my bad. My big mistake. Obviously, there's also the Lake and Riley bill, the vote that he made. But for me, I remember the moment where before pressure, in the absence of pressure, he had a unique moment there. Not to say that he's like my favorite candidate at all, but I do think depending on how he presents himself.
No, I mean, if he came out and he was like, listen, let's not take a single penny from AIPAC. Let's not give a single penny to Israel. Let's hold accountable special interest groups and let's challenge them. Let's run a vigorous anti-corruption campaign. Jon Ossoff, he used to run like an investigative company that would investigate corruption. So I think that's why he's got such strong anti-corruption messaging. It stems from that. I think that Medicare for all, I think that running on an affirmative message that can unify people, My team has been talking about reforming the tax code to end all the special tax breaks and loopholes for corporations that could raise quite literally like trillions in extra revenue. And there's like 80 special tax breaks that need to be completely erased. We need a Democratic Party that comes out and is able to just message on this in a very, very excitable way. I think Ossoff could do it. I like Pritzker. Obviously, he's not perfect, but I think that him being a billionaire could lead to an interesting campaign where he basically doesn't take any. He could run like the Trump type campaign where he doesn't take much money. But
well, also him being a billionaire, also, you know, I have an inherent distrust of billionaires. I'm discriminatory towards POWs, POC, people of cash.
Cash, yeah.
Yeah. POWs, people of wealth. You know, the only minority in the country.
I think he'd run a hell of a campaign.
People want me to ask you about Zoran and his platform. You like Zoran, don't you?
Yeah, I interviewed him when he was before the primary, like literally like months and months before the primary. I got an interview with him because his wife is from Syria and my family immigrated from Syria. So they kept sending me his clips and everything. And I was like, okay, I reached out and they were down to talk to me. I like him. He's incredibly captivating. I think that he proves that if you just have simple, intuitive policies that can reach the American people, that excite the American people, they'll show up. He kind of fits the mold of the anti-establishment, populist outsider who's going to come in and shake up the system. And I think that's the mold that really works right now. Kind of how Trump is run.
I think that's the mold that has worked always.
Yeah, it's kind of the mold in American politics that works. I don't even think it's how sufficiently left you are that matters, because weren't there exit polls showing that people thought that Kamala and Zoran are basically similar on the spectrum? So it's not even about how, it's just how intuitive your policies are, how captivating they can be. You said this earlier, but saying
people think Kamala Harris is more woke than, more left than Bernie Sanders. People think Kamala Harris is more left than Zoran Mamdani.
Yeah, and that's a messaging failure, obviously.
No, but that's not just a messaging failure though. That to me shows that like people define you as what either you are capable of defining yourself as, and with Kamala that was a failure. So she was defined by what her opposition was defining her as. And then also there's the obvious side of the story, which is that she's a black woman from California. And I think that was what was the reason why people were like, oh, she's so woke, she's so liberal, she's far too liberal. That's my point, is that like Americans don't actually make these sorts of decisions. 80% of them make it on simple team sports, D versus R. And then the 20% that vote on ideological grounds for the most part. But most people bracket themselves on just simple team sports. Like that's it. That's usually what it is.
Yeah, I agree. One of Kamala's campaigns was, or one of Kamala's policies, I can't remember. It was like student debt relief only if you live in a certain area and you're under a certain income. It was like the most, not only confusing, but the amount of qualifiers that were in there honestly just made me
$50,000 in tax credits for small businesses. Like, this kind of stuff sucks. And I was regularly railing on the campaign for putting this out there. I was like, this is not her best. Kamala Harris's best polled policy was literally price checks. She straight up came out and said, and she framed it perfectly. She framed it in a liberal way. She said, we're going to go after price gouging. Okay. She said, we're going to go after price gougers at the grocery stores. That was polling at 70%. Okay. And then the Republicans went crazy. They were like, price gouging, she means price controls. That's communism. That's communism. And for 2 months, they railed against her. The New York Times wrote an article about how silly this was, how stupid this policy was, how it would never happen. You want to know what she was polling at 2 months after those attacks?
What?
89%. No one gives a if something is called communist or not. If someone's like, I'm going to use the government to force the prices down, no one gives a shit about the ideological impact or whether or not this is like appropriate or not. That's my point. I kept repeating it over and over again. And then her brother-in-law, who is legal counsel Uber, came onto the campaign and was like, cut it out with this like anti-billionaire populist shit. There are good billionaires out there. You need those good billionaires on your side. And then Mark Cuban was tapped as a as a spokesperson for the campaign, and then the campaign took a very different turn, from that point on. These are all things. Like, I was there when these decisions were being made. I saw it happen in real time, and I couldn't believe how bad the strategy was. And they were, quite frankly, running as though they didn't want to defeat a fascist administration that was coming, but instead they wanted to win with their own ideological goals. They wanted to win without, the Free Palestine crowd and all these people that were spoilers in the Democratic Party. And that's precisely why a lot of liberal content creators at the time kept saying over and over again, we don't need you. We don't need you. We don't need the left. We will win without you. There are plenty of them that are probably watching this debate right now, and they know exactly who they are, that kept saying, finally, once we win, the Democratic Party, once we win without all the, pro-Hamas, Free Palestine protesters, we will show the country that we don't need them. And lo and behold, it didn't work. And it wasn't because people like myself had apathy for the party and didn't go out and vote. It was because all the people that had previously voted for the Democratic Party were like, I don't really care. This doesn't seem all that different for me. It's just, the exchange of power between Republican and Democrat doesn't matter to me at all. That's the average voter's position. I want to defeat that apathy, but I know that there is no way to defeat that apathy if the Democratic Party doesn't actively present a radical vision that corresponds to the people's needs.
Yeah, I guess I have one final question. Then I've got to go to a watch party for Raja versus Juliana Stratton. They're debating tonight, and it's like a Chicago race I kind of care about.
Yeah.
What do you think about a universal tax rebate, where it's like an intuitive policy? We end all the special loopholes that billionaires are able to take advantage of, and just do like a tax rebate for Americans. Obviously not far enough, but do you think that's a good policy we could run on that's intuitive? What do you say?
I mean, at first glance, it feels complicated. Like, it doesn't it's not easy to.
Billionaires don't pay a lot of taxes because they're able to take advantage of loopholes. Let's end these loopholes and give that money back to the American people.
Yeah, that seems a little bit like I feel like I'm more sympathetic to that. I wouldn't call it a rebate though.
Okay, I'll send you my document on it, and we're coming up with a Project 2029. It's the most, we're calling it the most vicious anti-corruption campaign to end special interest group control and revive our democracy.
I love an anti-corruption slant. I think that, that's what Donald Trump was doing. Like Donald Trump in 2016, when he said drain the swamp, what do you think that was? That was an anti-corruption campaign. Yeah. Obviously he wasn't ever going to drain the swamp.
But it's just crazy that's what he ran on, and then he pulled the rug on everyone so much that he started a Trump coin. Yeah,
it's wild. But that's what I'm saying. Guy. He also said he fucking was the most peaceful candidate. Yeah, we know he wasn't the peaceful candidate. He was president, and that was so frustrating to me that they didn't just go, "What the do you mean the most peaceful candidate? You were president for 4 years." And you assassinated high-ranking generals of a foreign adversary in contravention of all rules of war, and you were dangerously unstable at times over and over again. You accelerated drone warfare aggressively. You said you were going to pull out of Afghanistan. You didn't, and then you left that negotiation to be handled by the Biden administration, and then you punished Biden for actually being courageous enough to pull out of Afghanistan. There were so many opportunities. Anyway, I know you got to go. There's so many opportunities for the Democrats to present themselves as different than the Republicans, and they just failed. It's so frustrating to look back at. I wish they would, release the autopsy that they conducted. I don't know. Even the fact that they won't release it, and even though the autopsy itself is, I assume, conducted by the very same consultants that want to engage in some level of ass covering, implies that it must have been devastating.
Well, as we get closer to the primary, we should have more of these conversations, I think that healthy ideological debate's good. I think that when you're limited to 280 characters or whatever the fuck, everyone online is just so incredibly condescending. Even
I think Twitter is making people dumber. It's just, it is what it is.
I get it from the left. Here's the thing. The condescension that I see sometimes coming to you from liberals. I also get from the left. So I think it just creates an environment where we're all kind of talking past each other and creating tension. I saw so many strawmans where people were like, Hasan needs to endorse Newsom. And then I saw people saying, why does every liberal want Hasan to fall in line? I don't know. It just feels like everyone was talking past each other when,
okay. Well, here's what you can't do. You just can't listen to them. I don't. I just, I hope that people will be smart enough and intelligent enough to basically come in here and see what I'm about. And that's why so many liberals are always confused. They're like, why do the Podjons always associate themselves with this like dangerous terroristic individual or whatever? And it's like, yeah, because they're fucking adults. And I talk to them and they know what, like, they've known who I am for years and years. They know what my advocacy looks like. They know what my organizational principles are. And perhaps that's the reason why they don't have the same opinion that like random Twitter users do. But again, my hope is that people will remain charitable and will eventually come in and they will hear what I have to say and they'll realize, oh, okay, he is actually making a more comprehensive vision. He has a more comprehensive vision than what I saw in a 30-second clip, that he's not like saying that there is a functionally no difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party at all, or that like, there's more to this assessment. Because people love using that one clip when I was talking about like Kamala Harris is not going to represent a difference for the Palestinians than Donald Trump.
No, I understand the context around that clip, but I still will stay firm that there's like a dozen occasions I was searching through where you do just say something that is really either hyperbolic or irresponsible without following up afterwards. And I think we talked about that because then you said you do think, I think it's really important for your audience for you to keep repeating.
But I do that. Newsom I already do that if you see it.
I don't know. I have people saying that Gavin Newsom is quite literally, not you, but people are like, Gavin Newsom is just JD Vance with a blue tie. And I think they get that from the type of, way that you word this. Democrats would shoot you in the head to get trans votes or shoot trans people in the head to get extra votes. Like when I see people in my replies then saying Gavin Newsom is the same as a Democrat or same as a Republican, but just with a different color tie, I'm like, I don't know. It seems like a lot of people think that both parties are just marginally different, or at least would rule in a different way. But
I think this is so funny. I think I'm looking at the comments and people are saying, I used to be an Adam Mockler fan, but watching him sane wash Hasan the Hun is making me sick. Yeah, they're saying you didn't go hard enough on me. But I mean, as far as the voter apathy goes, the reason why I say over and over again that it's outside of my hands is because the like I've already told you that I have a much more nuanced vision beyond like whatever the clips that go viral, oftentimes by liberals, ironically enough, that want to present me as like having a very unnuanced point of view on the Democratic Party. But the apathy, I am not capable of making people feel voter apathy towards the Democrats beyond how the Democrats are representing themselves. So we gotta keep yelling at them is my point. And I hope you do that as well.
You are capable. You are capable. You have a massive platform. You're definitely capable of making people feel more voter apathy. I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying you're capable of that. I think the way that you speak about the Democrats sometimes could be cleaner. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to loop back to the marginal debate because it's mainly that word that I really just don't like. Unless you want to talk about that one again. I don't know.
No, it's all good.
There's not a marginal difference.
We can do it. We can do it we can do it at a different date. Next time people are yelling at me about some other shit, you can come and hold me to task.
Let me know. I'll be in LA in a few months. So
all right, we'll do another one of these then.
Yeah. Peace out, brother.
Bye. All right, that was Adam Mockler, everybody. I think that was a productive conversation. I feel like I hope people aren't too mean on him. Not even in my community necessarily, but I think people are going to be very mean to him in the edge communities on the liberal side, because they'll be like, this is the number one enemy of the Democrats. Like, how didn't you just fucking destroy his ass? You know?